There are secrets that live quietly in the shadows of a marriage. Small deceptions, white lies, things you choose not to examine too closely because doing so would shatter everything you've built. But what happens when those shadows grow so large they start swallowing your entire life? When the intrusive thoughts you've been pushing down for years suddenly demand to be confronted? This is the story of a woman who suspected the impossible, who spent years telling herself she was paranoid, overthinking, imagining things that couldn't possibly be true, until the day her teenage daughter wanted to date a boy who might be her half-brother. She met Luke in college. He was 43 now, same age as her, same age as Amy. Amy. Luke's childhood best friend since they were 7 years old. The person who'd been there before she ever was. The person who'd always be there, no matter what. When they first started dating, she'd felt threatened by Amy. Of course she had. What girlfriend wouldn't feel at least a little insecure about their boyfriend's female best friend, who he'd known since childhood? Someone he shared history with. Someone who understood him in ways a new girlfriend couldn't. But both Luke and Amy had been quick to reassure her. Their bond wasn't romantic, had never been sexual. They were like siblings. Surrogate siblings, they called it. Amy was just the sister Luke never had. And she'd believed them. Why wouldn't she? They were so convincing, so consistent in their messaging. And over time, the insecurity faded. Amy became her friend too. Close enough to officiate their wedding, close enough to be considered family. Luke and our narrator, let's call her Sarah, built a wonderful life together, got married, bought a house, started having children, 4 kids over the years, Sophie at 15, Owen at 12, Louise at 10, and Carter at 6. And around the same time Sarah and Luke were building their family, Amy was too. 4 children of her own, Tom at 17, Kaylee at 14, and 9-year-old twins Adam and Jenna. But here's the thing, Amy wasn't in a relationship, wasn't married. As far as Sarah knew, Amy was dating casually, but nothing serious. And yet, periodically, Amy would find herself pregnant, again and again, 4 times over the years. And Sarah and Luke never knew who the father was. Or fathers, plural. Amy never said. Claimed she didn't know. Maybe one-night stands, they figured. Maybe she was sleeping around and not keeping track. It seemed like the only logical explanation. Luke couldn't let his best friend struggle alone. He'd known Amy since they were kids. She was family. So he stepped up, financially supported her, got her somewhere to live, made sure she had what she needed to raise her children. Luke's parents helped too. They'd always loved Amy. Wealthy, generous people who were happy to provide for her. So between Luke's income, Sarah's good job, and the in-laws' support, Amy never had to worry about money. Sarah never saw it as Amy being a leech. Nobody did. She needed help. They could provide it. That's what family does. The 8 children were raised together, not in the same house, but close, saw each other constantly, formed strong bonds. The families were intertwined in ways that felt natural and wholesome. And if Luke spent a lot of alone time with Amy, if he went over to her place regularly, sometimes sleeping over, well, they'd been friends since childhood. It wasn't weird. Sarah hung out with Amy one-on-one too, though Luke did it more often. She was his friend first, after all. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt suspicious. The vibes between Luke and Amy seemed purely platonic, sibling-like, just as they'd always claimed. Until the intrusive thoughts started. It began small. A nagging feeling Sarah couldn't quite shake. She'd look at Amy's children and see something. Resemblances that felt more than coincidental. Tom looked like Luke. The hair, the eyes, the way he carried himself. Kaylee had Luke's rare allergy, the same specific one that ran in his family. The twins were sleepwalkers, just like Luke and Sophie. Sarah pushed it down, told herself she was being paranoid. These were common traits. Lots of people had similar features. She was seeing patterns where none existed. But the thought kept coming back, growing, spreading like poison through her mind. What if Luke and Amy had crossed that line? What if their bond wasn't as platonic as they claimed? What if some or all of Amy's children were actually Luke's? She felt guilty even thinking it. These were people she loved, people she trusted. Accusing them, even in her own mind, felt like a betrayal. So she buried it, year after year, told herself she was wrong, that her imagination was running wild, that she needed to stop being suspicious and trust the people she loved. Until Sophie, her 15-year-old daughter, developed a crush on Tom, Amy's 17-year-old son. Tom liked Sophie back. The two teenagers wanted to date, and suddenly, Sarah's buried suspicions became an emergency that couldn't be ignored. Because if Luke was Tom's father, if the genetics worked out that way, Sophie and Tom would be half-siblings. And the thought of them dating, kissing, potentially becoming intimate. Sarah felt physically ill. She tried to shut it down gently, told Sophie she was too young for Tom, that the age gap was inappropriate. Luke and Amy backed her up, agreeing Sophie shouldn't date yet. But Sophie pushed back, said she and Tom weren't officially dating, that they were just close friends, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. And Sarah couldn't explain the real reason she was worried. Couldn't tell her daughter, "I think Dad might be Tom's father, which would make him your brother." Not without proof. Not without being sure. So she came to Reddit, posted her suspicions, laid out all the evidence, the physical resemblances, the timing of the pregnancies, Luke's financial support, the alone time, the sleepovers, the fact that Amy had never once revealed who fathered her children. And Reddit told her what she already knew, but was afraid to admit. She needed to find out for sure. DNA test. Confront them. Stop living in uncertainty. Sarah tried to do a secret DNA test first, wanted to get definitive proof before causing drama. But she couldn't go through with it. The ethics felt wrong. Testing someone else's child without permission, behind their backs. Her lawyer advised against it too, said it would look bad in divorce proceedings regardless of the results. So Sarah was stuck. No proof. No way to get proof without causing problems. She decided to tell Sophie. Her daughter deserved to know why dating Tom might be dangerous. So she kept Sophie out of school one morning, sat her down, gently explained her suspicions about Luke and Amy, about Tom potentially being Sophie's half-brother. Sophie was quiet, took it in, then said something that shocked Sarah. "We need to talk to Tom about this." They called Tom, met with him. Sarah explained everything again, apologized for any indication she'd given that he wasn't good enough for Sophie. And then Sophie and Tom dropped a bomb. They already knew, or at least they'd strongly suspected. Tom had overheard conversations, sounds of sex coming from Amy's room when Luke was there, strange closeness between his mother and Luke. He'd voiced his concerns to Sophie back in January. She'd agreed. They'd both suspected for months that Luke was having an affair with Amy. That Luke might be Tom's father. That all of Amy's children might be Luke's. The teenagers were way ahead of Sarah, and they were on her side. Tom even volunteered his DNA for testing. Said he wanted to know the truth just as much as she did. But first, Sarah decided to confront Luke and Amy directly. With all the kids at school, Sarah sat Luke and Amy down, laid out everything. The similarities between Luke and Amy's children, the timing, the sleepovers, the financial support, the fact that Amy had never revealed the father's identities. She told them over and over how much she loved them, how she didn't want to believe it. But she had to ask, had they ever crossed the line? Was there any possibility Amy's children were Luke's? Their reactions were perfect. Too perfect. Amy was angry, offended. Luke seemed heartbroken by the accusation. They had reasonable answers for everything. Why did it suddenly bother Sarah that they spent alone time together when she'd never objected before? Were physical similarities really that significant? Hair colour and eye colour were common traits. Luke had always been like a father figure to Amy's kids. Why was that suddenly wrong? Sarah found herself apologising, multiple times, even though she wasn't sure she'd done anything wrong. Amy snapped that Sarah had never actually done anything for her, that it was Luke and his parents who'd supported her all these years. The confrontation ended with nothing resolved. No admissions, no proof. Just Sarah feeling like maybe she'd been wrong all along. But Sophie and Tom weren't convinced. They'd seen too much, heard too much, and they had a plan. While Sarah had been confronting Luke and Amy, the teenagers had been taking action. Tom had been trying to set up a camera in Amy's room to catch them in the act. They'd recruited Sarah's mother-in-law, asking for help with a DNA test. And Sarah, at the advice of her lawyer friend Paige, did something she'd been afraid to do. She went through Luke's phone while he was sleeping. She checked his recently deleted messages, found a conversation with Amy he'd thought he'd erased. Recent texts about Sarah being a problem, about how they'd expected this confrontation for a while. Then she found it. 5 days before Sarah had confronted them, Amy had sent Luke a topless photo. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through more deleted photos. Amy topless. Amy naked. Photos of them together, cuddled like a couple. Some with her naked. Some with both of them naked. Videos. Amy sending Luke topless video messages, calling him boo, talking about helping him get through the day. Her voice in that intimate tone, that lover's voice. Sarah almost vomited, had to stop looking. But she'd seen enough. She'd been right all along. The affair was real. Luke and Amy weren't just friends, weren't surrogate siblings. They were lovers, had been for years. Probably since before Amy's first child was born. Sarah contacted Paige immediately, her lawyer friend who specialised in family law. They started preparing divorce papers, started building a case. Sarah also found something else while going through paperwork. The house was in her name only. They'd always planned to add Luke's name, but never got around to it. The house was hers. He couldn't kick her out or claim half. The DNA tests came back. Luke was the father of all 4 of Amy's children. Every single one. Tom, Kaylee, Adam, and Jenna. They were all Luke's biological children, which meant Sophie had 4 half-siblings she'd grown up with thinking they were just family friends. Tom, the boy she had feelings for, was her actual brother. Sarah told her children, not about the explicit photos, of course, just that she'd found messages proving Luke and Amy had been having an affair. That DNA tests confirmed Luke was the biological father of Amy's kids. The kids had questions Sarah couldn't always answer. Why had Dad done this? Why had Amy lied for so long? Had Luke's parents known? How long had this really been going on? Sophie was devastated, but also validated. She'd suspected. Now she knew. And while it hurt, at least she hadn't accidentally dated her half-brother. Luke and Amy tried to spin the narrative. Amy claimed Luke had forced himself on her years ago, that she'd been traumatized, that she'd kept quiet to protect Sarah and the children. But Sarah had evidence that contradicted every word. Loving messages, photos they'd taken together willingly, videos of Amy being flirtatious and intimate. This wasn't assault. This was a long-term affair. Luke tried to claim he loved both women, that he'd been torn, that he'd made terrible choices but never wanted to hurt anyone. Sarah didn't care. She wanted a divorce, primary custody of their children. financial settlements that reflected his betrayal and deception. She learned from friends that people had suspected for years, had seen signs, but nobody had said anything because they didn't have proof or didn't want to cause problems. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Luke fought for custody, tried to paint Sarah as vindictive and irrational. But she had evidence, photos, messages, DNA tests, proof of a decades-long affair and multiple children born from it. The community took sides. Some supported Sarah. Others thought she was being too harsh, that Luke had made mistakes but was still a good father, that Amy was the real victim somehow. But Sarah didn't care what people thought. She cared about protecting her children, about making sure they understood that what their father did was wrong. That lies and betrayal have consequences. As everything unravelled, more details emerged. Amy had always wanted children, but never wanted the complications of a traditional relationship. She and Luke had apparently made an arrangement years ago. He would father her children, support them financially, be involved in their lives as Uncle Luke while maintaining his marriage to Sarah. Amy would raise them as a single mother and never reveal the paternity. It was calculated, deliberate. Not a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a planned deception spanning nearly 2 decades and 4 children. Sarah felt like she'd been living in a lie her entire marriage. Every family dinner, every holiday, every moment spent with the 8 children playing together, all of it had been built on deception. Luke's parents were horrified when they learned the truth. They'd loved Amy like a daughter, supported her financially, and she and Luke had been lying to them for years. The fallout was spectacular. Friendships ended. The tight-knit family unit they'd built completely fell apart. Amy found herself isolated, with many people in their social circle turning against her. Sarah focused on healing, on helping her children process the betrayal, on building a new life that wasn't contaminated by lies. Sophie struggled with her feelings about Tom. They were siblings, but they'd grown up not knowing. The crush she'd had made her feel sick now. Tom felt the same way. The younger children had a harder time understanding. Why were Mum and Dad getting divorced? Why couldn't they see Amy's kids anymore? Why was everyone so angry? Sarah tried to explain in age-appropriate ways that sometimes adults make bad choices, that Dad had lied about something very important, that it wasn't their fault and they were still loved. Luke wanted shared custody, wanted to maintain relationships with all his children, biological and not. But Sarah fought hard for primary custody. The court sided with her, given the evidence of his long-term deception. Amy tried to reach out multiple times, wanted to explain, to make Sarah understand that she'd never meant to hurt anyone, that she and Luke had genuine feelings for each other, that it wasn't just about lies and betrayal. But Sarah was done listening, done trying to understand, done being the understanding wife who made excuses for everyone else's bad behaviour. Looking back, Sarah could see all the signs she'd ignored. Years of red flags she'd explained away because she trusted them, because she didn't want to believe the people she loved could deceive her so completely. The sleepovers, the financial support, the way Amy's children looked like Luke, the timing of the pregnancies. Amy never dating seriously despite claiming she wanted to find love. It had all been there, hiding in plain sight. She just hadn't wanted to see it. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal, as massive as that was. It was the realization that she'd wasted years of her life building something that was never real. That the family unit she'd treasured was built on lies from the very beginning. But there was also freedom in knowing. No more intrusive thoughts. No more wondering if she was paranoid. No more feeling guilty for suspecting the truth. She'd been right all along, and now she could move forward. Build something real with people who wouldn't lie to her for decades. Teach her children that trust matters. that deception has consequences, that you don't have to accept betrayal just because it comes from people you love. This story went viral for a reason, because it touches something universal, the fear that the people closest to us might not be who we think they are, that our instincts might be telling us something our hearts don't want to believe. Sarah spent years doubting herself, pushing down suspicions because they seemed too crazy to be true, because trusting was easier than confronting, because maintaining peace was more comfortable than seeking truth. But those suspicions were right. Luke and Amy had been having an affair for years. 4 children were proof of that, and Sarah had sensed it, known it on some level long before she had evidence. The lesson? Trust your instincts. When something feels off, investigate. Don't spend years doubting yourself because the truth seems too painful to face, because living in a comfortable lie is worse than facing an uncomfortable truth. At least truth gives you the power to make real choices, to build something authentic, to stop wasting your life on people who don't deserve your trust. Sarah's story is ongoing. The divorce isn't finalized. The children are still processing. Amy and Luke are dealing with the fallout of their decades of lies. But Sarah? She's free. Free from doubt. Free from a marriage built on deception. Free to build a life where the people around her are actually who they claim to be. Sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people you'd never suspect. The childhood best friend who's like a sister. The devoted husband who'd never cheat. The elaborate lie everyone believes because no one wants to imagine it could be true. But truth has a way of emerging. Whether through a teenage crush that threatens incest, or photos on a phone, or DNA tests that confirm your worst fears. And when it does emerge, you have a choice. Stay and accept it, or leave and rebuild. Sarah chose herself. Chose truth over comfort. Chose her children's well-being over maintaining a lie. And in doing so, she showed that even after years of deception, even after discovering that your entire life was built on lies, you can still walk away. You can still choose dignity. You can still build something real. The best friend who was never just a friend. The husband who fathered a secret second family. The children who were half-siblings without knowing it. It sounds like a soap opera, a dramatic fiction, but it was real. It happened. And it's a reminder that sometimes reality is stranger and more devastating than anything we could imagine. But survival is possible. Truth is powerful. And choosing yourself, even when it means destroying everything you've built, is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Sarah learned that the hard way, but she learned it, and now she's free.